"Excuse me, ma'am," one of the security guards said. "We need you to leave." Confused, she tried to argue. "I'm the groom's mother. I came for my son's wedding." The guards exchanged glances, and one of them pulled out a photo from his pocket. It was a picture of Mrs. Helen. He looked at the photo and then at her, as if he recognized her. "We've been instructed not to allow your entry. Please come with us." Helen felt her heart break, but what happened next was incredibly hard to believe. This occurred in the cloudy city of Boston, where Helen, a woman with gray hair and hands calloused from hard work, woke up early as she always did. She awoke to the shrill sound of her alarm clock, an old device that had seen better days but still worked perfectly. She sat on the edge of her bed and looked around the small apartment she called home. Helen glanced at Robert's portrait on the dresser. He was wearing his high school graduation gown, smiling with his diploma in hand. Tears filled her eyes as she thought about all she had sacrificed so he could have a better future. She sighed and murmured to herself, "Today's the big day, my son. May God help us." It took a moment for her to compose herself before starting her morning routine. She washed her face in the bathroom sink and dressed in her simplest clothes, a worn-out wool sweater and a long skirt. Helen never cared much for appearances. Her only concern was ensuring Robert had everything he needed. While brewing a weak coffee in the small kitchen, she heard the phone ring. It was Robert. His voice sounded excited, but she detected a slight tone of concern. "Mom, are you ready for the big day?" he asked. Helen smiled, trying to hide her own anxiety. "Of course, my dear. I'm ready. I can't wait to see you there." Robert hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I know Sarah can be difficult sometimes. She wants everything to be perfect today. But don't worry, Mom. I love you and I want you there by my side." Helen felt a lump in her throat. Robert's love was what kept her strong, even in the toughest times. "I know, son, and I'll be there. Nothing in the world could stop me." After the call, Helen prepared to leave. She walked the streets of Boston, the cold wind cutting her face, but she pressed on. Arriving at the church, she saw the grandeur of the decorations. Exotic flowers, elegantly set tables, and the soft sound of classical music playing in the background. Everything seemed so distant from the simple world she belonged to. She entered the main hall and sat in one of the back benches, trying not to draw attention. As she waited, she watched the elegant guests arriving. She felt out of place, but she didn't mind. She was there for Robert, and that was all that mattered. Moments later, Sarah entered the church. She wore a stunning dress designed by a renowned designer. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, and the smile on her face was radiant, though Helen knew there was more behind that smile. Sarah spotted Helen, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. Helen smiled timidly, hoping for a friendly gesture. But Sarah quickly looked away and approached the nearby security guards. Helen couldn't hear what she said, but she noticed the furtive glances directed at her. Soon after, 2 security guards approached her. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," they said, with a polite yet firm tone. Helen was confused. "But why? I'm the groom's mother." The guards exchanged glances, and one of them replied, "We've been instructed that you're not on the guest list. Please come with us." Helen's heart tightened. She knew it was a lie, but she didn't want to cause a scene. She stood up slowly and walked out with the guards, glancing one last time at the grandeur of the church where her son would soon be married. As she walked outside, tears started streaming down her face. She couldn't understand why Sarah would do something so cruel. She sat on a bench outside the church, looking up at the cloudy sky and wondering where she had gone wrong. Inside the church, Robert was starting to worry. He couldn't see his mother anywhere, and his heart was uneasy. He tried to focus on the preparations, but Helen's absence weighed heavily on his heart. He murmured to himself, trying to push away the worry. "She'll show up. She's never let me down." But the truth was that Helen was outside, feeling more alone than ever. She had given everything to see Robert happy, and now in this crucial moment, it seemed like all her efforts had been in vain. However, Helen wasn't one to give up easily. She decided she would find a way to be present at the ceremony, even if it meant facing whatever obstacles Sarah placed in her path. She took a deep breath, stood up, and began to think about how she could get back inside the church. Her love for her son gave her the strength to move forward, despite the pain and humiliation. While Helen remained outside the church, her mind swirled with thoughts of sadness and determination. She needed to find a way to see her son get married. Boston's cold wind cut through her skin, but she hardly felt the chill, consumed by anguish. She decided that no matter what happened, she would get back inside that church. Inside the hall, Robert was restless. He searched among the guests for Helen but couldn't find her. He tried to hide his worry as Sarah chatted animatedly with her parents, displaying her usual indifference. Robert approached Sarah, trying not to seem desperate. "Sarah, have you seen my mom? I'm worried. She should be here." Sarah feigned surprise and replied with a cold smile. "Oh, Robert, I'm sure she must be around somewhere. Maybe she's running a little late. Don't worry so much. Today is our special day." But Robert wasn't convinced. He knew his mother wouldn't be late, especially on such an important day. He decided to take a walk around the church, hoping to find her. He passed by guests, receiving greetings and smiles, but his mind was focused solely on finding Helen. Meanwhile, Helen decided she needed to take action. She saw a side door of the church that seemed less guarded and decided to try entering through there. Her heart raced as she approached, fearing being caught. When she reached the door, she tried the handle and, to her surprise, it was unlocked. She slipped inside quietly, trying not to attract attention. She walked through the corridors, observing the luxurious decorations and the guests chatting animatedly. A lump formed in her throat as she realized how distant all of this seemed from her reality. But she pressed on, determined to find Robert. Back in the main hall, Robert was beginning to lose hope. He couldn't understand why his mother wasn't there. Sarah approached again, trying to sound understanding. "Robert, you need to relax. She'll show up." Maybe she felt a little uncomfortable with so many people. "She knows we're all here to support you." Robert looked into Sarah's eyes, trying to find some sincerity in her words, but all he saw was calculated coldness. He decided he needed to trust his instincts and continued his search. While Helen walked through the corridors, she heard familiar voices. She approached a slightly open door and peeked inside. There was Robert, talking with Sarah and her parents. Helen's heart filled with joy at seeing her son, but also with sadness at the coldness with which Sarah spoke of him. "Mom, where have you been?" asked Robert, his voice filled with concern. Helen couldn't hold back anymore. She entered the room, tears filling her eyes, but with unwavering determination. "Robert, my son, I'm here." Robert turned quickly, his expression changing from concern to relief. "Mom!" he exclaimed, rushing to hug her. "I was so worried. Where have you been?" Helen tried to smile, but tears streamed freely down her face. "I was prevented from coming in, my dear. I don't know why, but I'm here now." Sarah paled at seeing Helen. She tried to disguise it, but it was clear she wasn't happy with her presence. Before she could say anything, Sarah's father, Jonathan, intervened. "What's going on here? Who is this woman?" Robert, still embracing Helen, looked at Jonathan with a mix of anger and disbelief. "This is my mother, Helen, and she deserves to be here as much as anyone else." Jonathan looked at Helen, his face showing a hint of recognition. For a moment, he seemed lost in thought. "Helen," he said slowly, as if reliving a distant memory. Helen looked at Jonathan, surprised to see him there. "Jonathan, is it really you?" she murmured, her voice full of emotion. "I can't believe, after all these years..." Sarah, realizing something was happening, tried to change the subject. "Dad, this isn't the time for this. We have a ceremony to finish." But Jonathan was focused on Helen. He approached her, his eyes locked on hers. "Helen, I need to know, is Robert my son?" The room fell into absolute silence. Robert looked at his mother, bewildered. "Mom, what is he saying?" Helen felt like the world was crumbling around her. She didn't want to reveal the truth like this, but there was no more hiding. Yes, Jonathan. Robert is your son. I kept it a secret all these years to protect him, to give him a chance at a better life. The revelation hit like a bombshell. Robert was in shock, trying to process what he had just heard. Sarah looked furious, her face twisted with anger and confusion. Jonathan, on the other hand, seemed to have found a missing piece of his past. As the truth unfolded, Helen felt a mix of relief and fear. She knew nothing would ever be the same, but she was determined to face the future alongside her son, no matter what happened. The silence in the room was suffocating. Jonathan, still processing the revelation, stared intently at Helen. Robert, paralyzed by shock, tried to understand the implications of what he had just heard. Sarah, her face red with anger, interrupted the moment. Are you saying Robert is my brother? This is ridiculous. This woman must be out of her mind. Holding Robert's hand, Helen responded with a trembling voice. I wanted to tell you earlier, Robert, but I didn't know how. Jonathan and I had a relationship in the past. When I found out I was pregnant, he was already committed to Sarah's mother. I thought it would be best to raise you on my own. I never imagined our paths would cross like this. Jonathan stepped forward, his expression mixing sadness and regret. Helen, if only I had known, I would have done things differently. You have to believe me. Robert, still in shock, let go of his mother's hand and took a few steps back. So you're telling me my whole life has been a lie? That everything I knew about myself isn't true? Helen approached him, trying to calm him down. No, my son. Your life hasn't been a lie. I've always loved you and did what I thought was best for you. I didn't want to hide this from you, but I was trying to protect you. Sarah, now visibly furious, turned to Jonathan. Dad, is this true? How could you hide something like this from us? How could you let this woman raise your child alone? Jonathan, tears welling up in his eyes, tried to explain. Sarah, I didn't know. If I had known, I would have done something. Helen never told me about Robert. I loved her, but circumstances tore us apart. I didn't know. Robert, still struggling to process everything, felt a wave of emotions wash over him. Anger, sadness, confusion. He looked at Sarah, who was equally devastated. This is all a nightmare. I can't believe this is happening on my wedding day. Helen, feeling the weight of guilt, approached Robert again. I'm so sorry, my son. I never wanted things to turn out like this. If I could go back, I would do everything differently. Robert looked at his mother, his eyes reflecting the pain and betrayal he felt. I know you tried to do your best, Mom, but this is too much for me. I need some time to think. Sarah, still furious, turned to Robert. And what does this mean for us? How can we go on with this marriage knowing we're siblings? Robert shook his head, unable to answer. He felt lost, unsure of what the next step would be. He needed time to process everything. Helen, realizing the depth of Robert's pain, said softly, Let's get out of here, son. We need some time for ourselves. We can find a quiet place to talk and try to make sense of all this. Robert, still in shock, nodded slowly. Yes, Mom. I think we need to get out of here. Sarah, seeing Robert walk away with Helen, cried out in desperation. And what about me, Robert? What's going to happen to us? Robert paused for a moment, looking at Sarah with sadness. I don't know, Sarah. I don't know. Jonathan, watching the scene unfold, felt profound sadness. Helen, let me help. Let's figure this out together. I want to be a part of my son's life, even if it's too late. Helen looked at Jonathan, her eyes reflecting years of pain and sacrifice. All she wanted was Robert's happiness. Jonathan, we need time. We'll sort this out, but first we need a moment to understand everything. Jonathan nodded, respecting Helen's wish. Of course, Helen, I'll be here when you're ready. Helen held Robert's hand and guided him out of the church. The cold air of Boston felt even chillier as Helen and Robert walked slowly through the streets. Robert, his mind in turmoil, could barely feel the cold. Helen, on the other hand, tried to find words that could comfort her son, but everything seemed inadequate. "Mom, why didn't you ever tell me?" asked Robert, his voice choked with emotion. "Why did I have to find out this way, on my wedding day?" Helen stopped, looking at her son with tears in her eyes. "I always wanted to protect you, Robert. I didn't want you to grow up with the weight of this secret. I thought that if you knew the truth, it might hurt you more than keeping it hidden." Robert took a deep breath, trying to process his mother's words. "I understand that you tried to do what's best, but this is too much. I loved Sarah, and now everything feels like a nightmare." Helen held Robert's hand tightly, trying to convey as much support as possible. "I know it seems impossible right now, but you're strong. We'll get through this together. We've always been together, and we'll continue to be." As they walked, they found a small cafe that was open. They entered and sat at a table in the corner, away from the curious eyes of other customers. The waiter approached, and after taking their order, Robert finally began to speak again. "What do I do now, Mom? My whole life has been turned upside down. How do I move forward?" Helen sighed, feeling the weight of her son's pain. "Maybe the only thing we can do is take it one step at a time. You have a bright career ahead of you, Robert. And despite everything, you're not alone. I'm here with you." The waiter returned with their orders, and for a moment they both sat in silence, savoring the hot coffee that seemed to warm not only their bodies, but also their weary souls. Helen looked at Robert, remembering all the sacrifices she had made to get to this point. She knew that despite everything, he was a strong and determined man. "Robert, remember that you have a purpose. You've worked hard to get where you are. Don't let this difficult moment define your entire life." Robert looked at his mother, his expression softening a bit. "You always know what to say to comfort me, Mom. I just need some time to process all of this." Helen nodded. "I know, my son, and I'm here to give you all the time you need. We'll get through this together, one day at a time." Across town, Sarah was in her room, sitting on the bed with her eyes fixed on nothing. Helen's words echoed in her mind, and she felt a mixture of anger and despair. Her perfect world had been shattered in an instant, and she didn't know how to deal with it. Her parents tried to console her, but Sarah pushed them away, wanting to be alone. She needed to understand how all of this had happened and why her father had never mentioned Helen or Robert before. She felt betrayed by everyone around her. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to calm her thoughts. She loved Robert, but now everything seemed impossible. She didn't know how to face the future, but one thing was certain. She needed answers. Jonathan was determined to do what he could to help Helen. He knew he couldn't erase the past, but he wanted to ease the years of abandonment she had faced alone. With his influence and resources, he managed to ensure that Helen landed a good job at a renowned hospital in Boston, where she would find financial stability and recognition for her dedicated work over the years. Helen, moved by the opportunity and grateful for Jonathan's help, embraced the chance to restart her life independently. She remained close to Robert, supporting him in his medical journey and celebrating each achievement by his side. Meanwhile, Sarah faced her own emotional challenges. Despite still being in love with Robert, she knew their romance was impossible after discovering they were siblings. She decided she needed space to heal her heart and move forward. She moved to California, determined to start a new life, meet new people, and try to forget the whirlwind of emotions she had experienced in Boston. Robert finally graduated from medical school with the full support and pride of Helen and Jonathan. His graduation party was a moment of celebration, bringing together friends, family, and colleagues who had witnessed his journey. He excelled as a dedicated and talented doctor, finding his passion for medicine growing stronger every day. During his first year of work, Robert met a nurse named Emily, whose gentle smile and constant support captured his heart. Together, they shared a love for their profession and found comfort in each other while facing the challenges of the hospital. Time passed, and Robert and Emily decided to take the next step in their relationship. They married in a simple and intimate ceremony, surrounded by the love of their closest friends and family. Helen and Jonathan were radiant with happiness to see Robert find his path to personal and professional fulfillment. As life continued, Helen continued to work at the hospital, leaving her mark as a respected professional loved by her colleagues and patients alike. Jonathan, meanwhile, found comfort in reconciling the past with the present, acknowledging the mistakes made and doing what he could to mend the damage. Although the scars of the past never completely faded, everyone involved found peace and redemption in their new journeys. The story of challenges, discoveries, and unconditional love showed them that even in the darkest moments, the future still holds the possibility of hope and new beginnings. Throughout their intertwined lives and unexpected bonds, Helen, Jonathan, Robert, and Sarah discovered that love and redemption can bloom even in the most barren grounds of life. Each faced unique challenges but found strength in family unity and the determination to move forward despite adversity. Life is a journey of discovery and growth, where forgiveness and unconditional love are essential to heal old wounds and build a better future. The lessons learned from this story remind us of the importance of cherishing every moment, every person who enters our lives, and never underestimating the power of compassion and understanding. If you enjoyed this touching story and want to follow more inspiring narratives like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give a like so you won't miss the next stories. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope to see you on the next emotional journey.